we create supernatural monsters, and vampires are a great example of this. Like, we don't mean sparkly vampires, we mean actual vampires. We create these monstrous people, basically, because it's difficult to accept that people are the monsters. Everything that Dracula is humanity. Like, he's just the worst of us. And it's easier to feel safe if the monster has been clearly mythologized and made up. Because then you can partition that off and say, this is a story, this can't happen. And I think the same is kind of true with magic, in that how does a planet come into being? Like, long before anyone had understood anything about the expansion of universes or galaxies, like, how does a planet come about being? Well, it must be Kronos, like it must be the Titans made it, or even when they looked back at things that were made, and the Romans surely must have had some sort of magical powers, because how could they raise buildings so high? And it puts it into the otherworldly, which is definitely not real, and that. And then you've got the things that you actually have to cope with and deal with in your life.
What is up, everybody? You're listening to episode 78 of SFF Addicts. I'm your host, Adrian M. Gibson, and welcome to your weekly dive into the world of science fiction, fantasy, and writing craft. Joining me, as always, my co-host, the Chewie to my Han Solo, the Joker to my Commander Shepard, my dear MJ Kuhn. How are you, MJ?
Hello, I am doing great. How are you, Adrian?
Doing very well. And if you want to get heisty with some morally gray characters and some stabby and hatchets and all that fun stuff, go pick up Among Thieves. MJ's nodding. She's puckering her lips because she knows shit gets stabby.
It gets
if you want to pick up the sequel,
stabby.
check out Thick as Thieves to read this complete duology and support MJ's work. As well, a quick note for everyone out there listening or watching: the official SFF Addicts Patreon and merch store are live, so check the links in the description to support what we do here. And don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and subscribe to the FanFiAddict YouTube channel, where this and every other episode of the show is available in full video. And now joining us once again is the great Ed McDonald, author of Daughter of... It's upside down? Yeah, it is. Daughter of Redwinter. And its new sequel, Traitor of Redwinter. How are you, Ed?
I am excellent. Thank you very much. You guys are so chirpy. It's like... it's like, God, how old are these people? How do they get the energy? Like,
like we're excited to be talking to you or something. I don't know.
These fucking spry young 31-year-olds.
So I just thought I'd bring down Tentaclara. Tentaclara,
I like
Tentaclara has been traveling the world with me recently, and I thought, why shouldn't she be on a podcast?
I love it.
Because MJ and I have the energy to bring in, to bring in your little like stuffed octopi. I like it. Everyone,
that is objectively would be way too much fun. I would be fidgeting with those little tentacles all the time.
That's actually why I have her, because when I was ill, I had a nerve condition, and I was paralyzed, and my fingers didn't work. So one of my or a couple of my friends got me Tentaclara so that I could practice touching stuff, and it was a windy tentacles. That's actually how I have her. But she mostly just sleeps.
So she was your physiotherapy. That's beautiful.
Yeah, now she travels the world.
Well, welcome to the podcast, Tentaclara, along with Ed. And heads up, this is part 2 of our 2-part chat with Ed, so I recommend checking out part 1 to get to know him better. Today, though, we're seeing dead people as we dive into a masterclass on supernatural magic. So to get started with this most magical masterclass, Ed, good sir, where did your fascination with the supernatural begin?
Oh, you always have these questions that are like, I'm going to think about my past.
Get all introspective. You write introspective, character-driven fantasy, so fucking deal with it.
I just don't know. Like, where it just seems more interesting to write about stuff that can't happen than to only write about stuff that can. And I realized, like, recently when I was thinking about the Red Winter books, they're kind of a bit like Jedi. It's like, oh yeah, they are. They can do some Jedi stuff, but in a much more complicated way. Like, Star Wars, it's the Force. Done. That's all. That was the explanation. That's all we needed. I'm like,
that was all we needed. Until the explanations came unnecessarily.
Then we wish we'd never heard of the midichlorians.
Exactly.
I think that there are certain stories that you can only tell where you are involving magic, because our history as a species, ever since we could talk, people have been able to ask the questions that we can't ever know, some of the answers to, or we certainly couldn't until we had astrophysicists who are way cleverer than us. Well, I say us. You guys might be smarter than I'm certainly not.
It's like side job as astrophysicist. No big deal.
Yeah, right. That's my day job, actually.
Yeah.
It's the all those myths, all the religion myths, going our earliest written work being the Epic of Gilgamesh. Like, these are the first work written in English is first literary work anyway is Beowulf. Like all through the history of humanity, we've believed that there must be beings that can do stuff we can't. Because otherwise, how do you make sense of anything else in our reality? Now, and I think those stories and those myths filter through into you. I loved Greek myths when I was growing up. And Arthurian myths. Those were absolutely my favorites as a kid. And there are certain stories you can't tell unless someone is able to, like, nuke a city with a flick of their hand. Like, that power disparity between mortal and immortal is it's a part of humanity's storytelling history.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit more. What do those supernatural beliefs and how they show up in histories, religions, folklore, mythologies? What do you think that tells us about human nature, and how it kind of shapes the way we interact with the world and the way we kind of think about things like death, the afterlife, all those like real heavy topics?
Well, it's very much tied in with the way that we create monsters for our stories as well, whether they are a hydra, a dragon. And I think this is my best way of reflecting into that question, is that we create supernatural monsters, and vampires are a great example of this. Like, we don't mean sparkly vampires, we mean actual vampires. We create these monstrous people, basically, because it's difficult to accept that people are the monsters. Everything that Dracula is humanity. Like, he's just the worst of us. And it's easier to feel safe if the monster has been clearly mythologized and made up, because then you can partition that off and say, this is a story, this can't happen. And I think the same is kind of true with magic, in that how does a planet come into being? Like, long before anyone had understood anything about the expansion of universes or galaxies, like, how does a planet come about being? Well, it must be Kronos, like it must be the Titans made it, or even when they looked back at things that were made, and the Romans surely must have had some sort of magical powers, because how could they raise buildings so high? And it puts it into the otherworldly, which is definitely not real, and that. And then you've got the things that you actually have to cope with and deal with in your life. But I do think with that mythology that there is. I don't believe that in our distant past, when people were telling each other stories and telling myths, that anyone thought they were real. I think they told, because do you know how difficult it is to know what happened in the next village along to you?
Yeah.
Like, even today, even getting the truth on something as clear as the Capitol attacks on, the assault on American democracy, perhaps. It's just there in black and white. You can't miss it, and yet people will still disagree. The idea 5,000 years ago that anyone could legitimately say, nope, this is definitely what happened in the beginning. Like, no one was trying to claim it. It was meant, it was meant to be. They're parables and allegories, and the Greek myths are a great example. Obviously, Greek myths isn't 5,000 years old, but they're a great example. Like, don't look at women when they're getting undressed in the river. If you do, you'll get turned into a deer. Like, she might be a goddess. Don't trust a swan. Like, these,
I agree with that one though.
They'll break your arm.
I would say these are all great advice still, I think.
Yeah. But I think a good way of thinking about something like the Greek myths is these are a stable of IP characters who you can talk to other people about in your early communities, where we all know who like Thor is, we all know who Ra is, and we can talk about them and have stories as though there's a connection. It's like the Marvel universe for gods, and so why not give them superpowers? Aren't those? There's a big difference between, say, a Judeo-Christian god who is all-powerful, singular, and the pantheon gods of the ancient world who fought each other, whose powers change at random depending on what story they're in. And it's just like a Marvel universe. It's the ancient combined universe, the ACU.
And it's fascinating because this distinction, the ACU, that's great. This distinction between what is magic and what is mythology, the lines of that just become so blurred. But I like what you said about how nobody was trying to define anything back then. So from your perspective now, like the way that you perceive something like magic in the context of mythology, in the context of supernatural folklore and all that kind of stuff, how does that kind of come to terms in your head in terms of like, how do I grapple with this rather nebulous, fucked up kind of distinction?
Well, I'm glad you've asked that, Adrian, because okay. So I'm not. What I'm. If our viewers don't know the difference between hard and soft magic systems, I won't explain it here because most of them will. Go and look it up if you've not heard the difference. But anything can work depending on the type of story you're trying to tell. So Blackwing and the Raven's Mark books, they have both elements in. I have magic that has rules and I have magic that doesn't have rules. Redwinter is the same, except the big difference being in the Raven's Mark, the protagonist, the first person narrator, never, well, no, that's not quite true, not never, but in the first two books, he doesn't have any magical powers. He doesn't, and that means that the magic gets to be mysterious. It doesn't have to be, it has to be consistent. It can't, you have to understand this person can do a thing which is threatening and it has to repeat, it can't disappear late in the book. That's just continuity. But if your protagonist doesn't have an inner knowledge and working of the magic, you do not have to describe in great detail how that works. And a good example, I've just read a book called The Silver Blood Promise by James Logan. It's out next year. Ah, yeah, you've got the only other review on Goodreads.
I know. I loved it. I thought it was so good.
Great book. His magic users, the main character is not one of them, and so we never have to know what they're doing. He does explain it, but you can get away with a one-sentence description of how it works. They channel it from the other place. What's that? Yep. Oh, it's mysterious. Whereas what I went and did in Redwinter is I went, why don't I have like a teenager who starts learning magic from the first chapter of the first book? I need a system.
That means I need to learn the magic.
you have to have real tight rules, and you get to break them when you want to, but you have to know what they are to break them. It's like grammar. Mm-hmm. As long as you know what it's meant to be, it's fine when you change it. I mean, that thing where you may be familiar with this, where an editor puts in the comments, but why is it that this person doesn't seem to have aged over the 40 years that have passed? But how did he get from the ground floor to the 6th floor in less time than the hero who went up the stairs? And you just write, magic? Question mark.
Stet for voice.
They hate that. Editors hate that. You're like, it's the magic.
I can only imagine.
I mean, certainly Witch Queen that I've just finished, Witch Queen of Redwinter, is... I mean, it says it all, doesn't it? If you write a book where someone has become an actual witch queen, then you've got to be able to explain constantly to the reader, how are they doing this? Why does it work? And what are the differences between what they did before and what they're doing now? Why is it stronger? But for me, for a fantasy book, the magic should be tied as a core element of the plot. The story should revolve around resolving the magical technicality. Otherwise, shouldn't you be writing historical fiction? Like, I don't think the magic should just be flashes and bangs. I don't think someone should be a wizard just because it's cool to have a wizard. If they're a wizard, I feel like their wizarding should be impactful in some way, rather than just being, you know, in Harry Potter, how they're all like, doing all their Expelliarmuses and stuff on each other. And like Avada Kedavra is like the worst thing. Why doesn't someone just get a gun?
It's the magic bullet.
Bang!
It's the magic
Harry
bullet.
Potter. Bang!
Yeah.
Like, that's it.
You're like, plot hole discovered.
The magic is less potent than basic technology from hundreds of years ago, and no one has realized.
Yeah.
So they're not really doing magic. They're just children with bad guns.
Yeah. No, because this gets into something that I've been thinking about in terms of like, okay, so your approach for magic in the Redwinter Chronicles, where you realize like, fuck, I kind of have to make this a little bit more rigid in terms of its rules and stuff like that. And I know how much you don't want to do a hard magic system, Ed. I know, dude. But, but can you build a little bit more in terms of that? Magic systems as an aspect of the story, something that you meld with the world building, the characters, and the plot, essentially interlinking the major story elements with the magic, such that it too is a vital component of the story. Like I love this kind of notion, and I want you to dig deeper into that. So
at the heart of these books, there is the concept of existential oneness. I mean, ask a literary question. This is what you get. So even to the extent that at the back of the first book, there is actually a section where I explain how the magic system works. So the system is for this or these particular magic users, you expand your consciousness out from yourself into the world around. And I got to this by thinking, we're made up of atoms, and there's nothing between an atom and another atom. Like, even unless we're in a vacuum where there's just nothing. But even then, if there's nothing between one thing and another thing at the smallest level, then does it matter if there's nothing between them at the biggest level? So 2 planets separated by a vacuum, 2 atoms also separated by vacuum. The only thing that matters is the size of the vacuum, but a vacuum isn't anything. Therefore, there's nothing separating either of them by definition. Therefore, everything is entirely in the same place all the time. And there is no meaningful difference between anything and anything else. If you're separated by nothing, you're separated by nothing. So this was the principle on which the magic system operates, that everything is one. So if everything's one, the one thing that defies that I don't understand in physics is how my brain thinks I can hear myself talking in my own head. Like, what is that? Like it's a trick, sure, and my brain's playing a trick on me, but what's hearing it? Like, it's me. And so the idea that the one thing you have is a soul, which isn't something I believe in real life, but for the purposes of writing books about ghosts, it's kind of important. If you can expand that out into other things, you kind of start becoming one with them. So you ascend through a series of trances, expanding into yourself, then the other, the world around you, then into energy, into the mind, into life, and then into number 6, which is death, which is what our girl Rain, She goes, I've got number 1, I know myself, and I got number 6, I know the death. Which is the forbidden one, obviously, because it makes you the necromancer lord.
It's your Avada Kedavra. Sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, Rain's ultimate. The body count. I think we have a body count of about 14 in book 1, which is very restrained for me. And then we rapidly go into the triple digits in book 2, and I haven't even estimated for book 3. It's I think we're in the millions.
It's one of these curves, right? I don't know enough math to be able to tell you what kind of curve. Thank you.
Exponential curve, yeah.
Oh, I love it.
But the whole of Rain's problems on a personal level are caused by possessing this magic, which she starts off just being able to see ghosts, but that in itself is enough to get her stoned to death, and punished and killed. And she effectively becomes one of the people who do the punishing in hiding what she is. But then progressively finds that looking through the gate of death is what gives her the powers she needs to do the things she wants for the people she loves and kill all the people she wants to stop. So without the power, there isn't a story. She wouldn't be there. But it's also her character development in each book. So in the first book, there is a kind of allowing herself to accept that she needs other people because she's withdrawn from them, she's cut off from them. And then in Traitor of Redwinter, it's more about accepting herself for who and what she is. And no one has read Witch Queen but me at the moment, so I won't even go into that. That's for next year's podcast.
Yeah, there you go. I love that, though. I feel like that's a part of what makes it great, though, is when the character arc and the magic is just it's inextricably linked, or to each other and to the plot. So it sounds like you did some research, or maybe you just know a lot about atoms. I don't know anything about atoms, but it sounds like you did some research in that front.
Ed's moonlighting as an astrophysicist.
We've discussed this. He may be secretly, right? But did research play into any other aspects of developing the supernatural magic, or the system that you have for the Redwinter Chronicles?
No, I don't do research. I just don't do any. I just have a shabby layman's understanding of astrophysics. I occasionally have to. I suppose. Okay, I did some research the other day. I had to play videos of an avalanche to hear what it sounds like, so that I could describe it properly.
Oh, I love doing research like that.
Yeah.
It's just YouTube, isn't it?
It's effective, though, right? It does.
Imagine when you had to go to libraries and you had to go out the house. But most of my writing doesn't really need it, because I write about the things that I love and I already know about, and that's why I want to write about them. So occasionally I'll look up minor technical details of things. I did have to. The main research I did actually was looking into Gaelic folklore. And also pronunciations, because when your audiobook narrator comes to you and says, "How do I pronounce all these words?"
and you're like,
"Speak Gaelic." And the word, and I'm like, I don't trust Google pronouncer bot to get these right. So I did ask some Gaelic speakers how to pronounce them. They said the words you've because I sort of bastardized certain words. Like, I can trace my history back to 1793 in Scotland. No one could call me out on this. I'm like, so yeah, I used Scottish Gaelic, and they were like, "This word couldn't exist. Like, you can't put these letters together." And I was like,
Wow.
"But how would you pronounce it?"
right? You're like, "Do that? I already did."
It's already published. Sorry.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But also, it's inspired by I'm not writing in Gaelic. I'm not trying to. Part of me did want to sort of do some representation, because you don't get a lot of Scottish-based fantasy, and both sides of my family are different routes down from Scotland into England, and I wanted some representation for Scotland. Because it's a wild and beautiful place, and it really, I think fantasy feels very alive there, as it always does in wild places. So a little research there. I mean, if anyone from HMRC, that's the IRS for the UK, for Americans, if anyone is watching, I've also done a great deal of research in various countries around the world.
Field research.
Yeah,
Character studies, if you will.
I've done a lot of research in California. I've done. It's true though, like, because everything ends up being research anyway. And one of my biggest tips for aspiring authors is just travel. Go to as many places as you can and see as much of the world as you can, because, like, it's great if your research has an actual targeted focus, but sometimes research is just being alive. Like, you need to be having strong emotional reactions to things, because that's what books are about. Books are just about someone's emotions start one place and they end up somewhere else. And they're happy, they're unhappy, and they try and get happier. And if you write grimdark books, they probably end up about the same.
Or sadder.
Sine wave.
Right?
So like, I know for some people it's difficult if you have family responsibilities, if you have caring responsibilities, if your mobility is limited, all these things. Like, but the more that you manage to get out there and see things and meet different people, experience the world, I think the better, certainly as a fantasy author, the better your writing is going to be.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I'm a big believer that everything you see, experience, read, write, watch, whatever, all of that, whether you mean to or not, like, at some piece of it, it becomes a part of the greater you that then, you are the one that's writing your books. So
the conscious blender.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking on that subject, though, I have to imagine that the projects that you're writing obviously all influence kind of, one another, with the lessons you're learning. What kind of big magic related lessons did you learn, or do you think you've learned, feel like you've, played with during both your first series and the Red Winter Chronicles?
For the first series, it was easy, right? Because the protagonist isn't doing the magic. By the time you've got any sort of mystical stuff going on, it's book 3, and in book threes are easy, right? Book 1 is hard because you got to come up with something original. Book 2 is hard for reasons we spoke about last time. Book 3 is easy because it's just reveal, end sequence, big payoff, hurrah! Like, that's what I'm doing. So book 3, you should already know what happens somewhat in book 3 at least. In the Red Winter Chronicles, what I learned was, if you're going to drop a magic wielding ghost visitor mentor like Obi-Wan, but like, basically, if you cross Obi-Wan ghost with Maleficent, that's the Queen of Feathers, who incidentally is written in order that if it ever got made into a TV show, a particular friend of mine could play her. So she uses some of her inflections and some of those. But
oh my God, I love that.
If she turns up in chapter 1, you should probably know who and what she is exactly before you get to start writing book 3. Because the point of the series, like, she's a big part of this story. And I sort of had an idea. But when I was doing my world timeline, there was a bit where I was like, right, I've got 5,000 years worth of world history here, and she's got to be in all of it. I should really try and make sure these events actually make some kind of sense. But for me, part of the discovery process in writing is it does all make sense. And when you force yourself into weird corners because you go, oh, hang on. In book 1, I said this, and in book 2, I said this, and how can they both be true? You have to make it work, which means the thing you come up with gets stranger and stranger and more unlikely. But then you find my brain then connects these weird angles together, and it goes, that's so much better than anything I could have thought of if I didn't force myself. So what I'm saying is, it's all part of a process, isn't it? That's it.
No, but dude, that is it though. It's like what we were talking about last episode in terms of obviously you can stick to an outline, you can stick to whatever kind of structure you you set for yourself when writing a story, but a lot of the stuff that happens that is better than anything you could have come up with came up organically through the act of writing the story. And I think probably with magic systems, and especially with supernatural stuff, like the weirder it gets, the more fun it is. I feel like weird magic is the most fun because you can play around with it in such a way that kind of warps our sense of reality. And earlier we were talking about storytelling and how we have all these myths and folklore that exist and permeate human cultures across the world in different ways, and how storytelling has been a major part of how supernatural beliefs and magical practices took shape. And I feel like a lot of that was just like humans using their imaginations and just getting really fucking weird, trying to explain things that they otherwise could not grapple with. And at the same time, like you said, not being so rigid and having to define exactly what that thing is, or why that thing exists, or why this story took shape the way it did. So do you want to dig deeper into the role of stories, but specifically why fantasy is such a perfect playground for experimenting with these kinds of things, with the strange, with the esoteric, with supernatural magic and whatnot?
Well, fantasy is always a story about us today. Whatever you're writing, I hate the expression "everything is political," because if you say everything's political, it means nothing's political because it's become a meaningless term, right? So I think that's a waste of time saying. But what I do think is, whatever we're writing about, even if we're writing historical fiction, we're still going to be so heavily influenced by today that we can't help but put those themes and motifs in it. So fantasy is a way of exploring things that are important to us in a world which is divorced of all the real world connotations that it normally has to. So if you look at, say, Abercrombie's Trouble with Peace, the Age of Madness series is about Brexit. The whole series is an allegory for Brexit. There are even phrases that some of the characters use which are directly taken from British politicians at the time. And it casts it into another light because we get to explore it with different characters where we don't have preconceptions about who and what they are before they even start speaking. If I take my books, if I look at my Raven's Mark on a more personal level, my second book, I'm like, oh, that's my divorce book. Like that's that I can when I read back, I'm like, oh God, I remember thinking like this when I was I just got divorced. And then the third book in the series is like, this is my joy book. Like this is my hope book, like about being less depressed. But and because of that, I could only ever have written them in that particular moment in time, and I could never have written them at a different one because they rely on these emotional experiences I was having. And the fantasy, for me, lets me take myself completely out of myself. So it becomes a subconscious, it's almost therapy, perhaps. I don't know what it'll be. I suppose, there will be a day where I look back on the first Red Winter book and think there's a lot of feelings in here about being trapped, forced into a lifestyle, things like being out of your control. And it's like, yeah, there's a pandemic. We were all stuck at home. I'm sure I'll reflect on that in the future and find like, yeah, this is a book about the world being hostile all of a sudden, So fantasy for me is a subconscious floodgate. And also, swords are awesome, lasers are awesome, laser swords. Like, who doesn't like? I don't know why we love dragons so much. It's like they're just big lizards.
Just do. They're just cool.
Yeah,
they're just
the dinosaurs
cool.
with wings, man.
Who said that meme with Marge Simpson? I just think they're neat.
I want to write vampires. I'd love to write some vampires, but I mean, I want to write vampires the way that vampires are. In my mind, vampires are utterly, irredeemably evil creatures, and they're emotionally predatory as well as physically. And all the mythology only works for me if they are impossibly evil. We're their food. We're their food. They don't care about us. So I'd love to write, like, vampires let us tell stories. Well, let's be honest. At the moment, they're largely used to tell stories about very old men getting it on with girls who are far too young to be with old men. That's the way that the vampires are used in the modern age. So, Angel and Buffy, Vampire Diaries. Don't get me wrong, I watch all these, but
You're like, I'm not hating, but also
I do not condone this behavior.
Vampires are a stand-in for the sexual fantasy of older men with younger women. It's really quite gross. Like, what? Just because he looks like he's 17 and pretends to go to school sometimes?
Dude.
Why is he pretending to go to school?
It's a question I've had for a long time about those storylines.
Because he knows that he's looking for those kinds of girls. He knows. He wants the naivete.
Precisely why they're going to a school. That's the only, like, at the start of the Vampire Diaries, the only reason the vampires are going to school is to hook up with girls.
Yeah.
And they conveniently forget about that in later series, and they just stop going to school.
They're like, we don't want.
We moved on from that.
We're not going to address that.
So whether it's a sort of erotica story, or it's a story like, Dracula is a story about corruption and the impossible, the difficulty in fighting something which is invisible and lascivious, and so it's the use of the fantastic to tell the stories that matter to us. That's my feeling.
Yeah, I like that. Well, we've talked a little bit about vampires, or a lot of bit about vampires. Do you have other favorite examples of, like, supernatural magic in fantasy, folklore, or myth, and specifically Gaelic folklore? If you have any, I'm very curious. I don't know much about it, so.
So I mean, anything with a tentacle, I'll take. Give me a kraken. Give me Cthulhu.
Where's our other guest? She's got to come back in here for a second.
Yeah, right.
You summoned Tentaclara.
There she is.
There are a startling number of of Gaelic mythological creatures which are just horses that live in the sea. There's a lot of water horses. What's really interesting about them as well, also, just lots of monsters that are just like a person, but he's only got one arm and one eye and one leg, and he hops around. It's not much of a monster. Like, if anything, it's like, don't bother it. There's one in particular which I like, which is I think there's a type of sort of ghostly washerwoman who. She kneels down and she's washing, laundering the clothes of the dead, basically. But she, I didn't make this up, but basically, she has very long, saggy breasts, and if you go and grab one of them, then she has to grant you a wish.
What? That is like the folklore version of the folklore version of pull my finger and I'll fart kind of thing.
It's just so improbable. Like, someone would have come up with this. Like, and if
here we are.
Yeah, but you have to sneak up, because if she looks at you, die or something like that. Like,
sneak up and grab a tit. Just Jesus Christ.
It's the random and improbable ones that are there. Instead of being like, it's just like a really big, like, lion and it's got a snake for a tail. It's like, that's not that interesting, is it? But, like,
saggy boobed hag.
Washing
That's what the gold is.
This is like the Gaelic Celtic version of like a genie. It's just like, go grab this. She'll grant you a wish.
Yeah.
Just go give it a tug.
Oh, God.
Don't get caught, though. Don't let her see.
Quite a lot of their monsters, like the folklore.
I hate that phrasing.
Oh my God.
The folklore spirits, lots of them are friendly, though. Lots of them don't bother you very much. Like, and I think they hail back to a world where, I mean, I don't know what snakes live where you round your way.
Anaconda.
Anacondas, yeah.
No.
So
Yeah,
I
you
saw.
got big ones. I got
I
nothing
got big ones in
serious here.
Ecuador.
I'm in
Yeah.
Michigan.
You got garter snakes,
we
baby.
do have a lot of garter snakes. We have some rattlesnakes and stuff, but that's as bad as it gets here.
I saw a rattlesnake for the first time ever a few weeks ago, just sleepily crossing a path in front of us.
You're like,
Yeah, we were like, we're going back. But if you imagine, like, I've lived in the UK all my life, and I know we don't live that agriculturally anymore, but our only venomous snake is the adder type of viper, and I've never seen one. I've never seen a grass snake, which is the other type of snake we have. And so if someone was bitten by an adder, and it's not going to kill you much, not really going to kill you, an adder, but like, you know, you get a bad swollen up leg, and someone came and told you this that 2,000 years ago, then what's the difference between whether it's a snake that's bitten you or it's the blue men of the Minch? You know, like it's a goblin. Like, both of them are equally far-fetched because you've never seen either. So why? And if someone's told you, yeah, there's this lizard and it hasn't got any legs and it just goes through the grass and it has a rattle on its tail, you'd be like, are you kidding me? No. Why is that more plausible? So I think a lot of folklore is, yeah, your grandma says, if you think of the number of people who claim to have seen ghosts, you know, shame no one's ever managed to capture any sustainable scientific proof, isn't it? But the amount of people who will tell you they've seen a ghost, or their grandma told them she saw a ghost, usually, then it's not any more implausible to believe in the water horses who live off the coast, who, of course, you've never seen the mermaids. Why would you see the mermaids? They're in the sea. You're not a sailor. So it's easy to see how people believe in all these things. But I love how mundane they are. Like, they're just like people.
But the thing is, Ed, for me, from my perspective, the reason that it persists, even in its mundane nature, is because of ritual. You know, it's like the ritualized nature of storytelling and folklore and that kind of thing, but also practices. Like here in Ecuador, there are so many different practices for, like, I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but like with my 7-month-old's baby clothes, my mother-in-law tells me do not leave it outside because little, like, gnomes will come and steal the baby's clothes because it fits them, kind of thing.
Which is objectively adorable.
They very well might, yeah.
And I love that.
But the thing is, like, but like with the supernatural, I feel like the reason it persists so much is because of that ingrained ritual practice that goes from generation to generation. And then you have things like paganism and natural magic and necromancy as we perceived it back then. And you have things like spirits and mediums and seances and all that. But then on the other hand, and this is like a big thought that I had while we were talking, is how fantasy and books that we read are also ritualized practices that make that allow these folklore and these supernatural ideas to persist. So I wanted to get your take on the parallels that we could draw between these things and how they kind of connect us over time and connect us individually.
Well, in terms of sort of the ritualization of what we read, I think that's a really interesting concept. And if we look at the Cursed Place, otherwise known as Goodreads, then what I think we can see more and more, and maybe it just used to be invisible, where not everyone had a place where they could post their opinion. But what I think we see there is people's expectations of what they're going to be given going into a book in some quarters are very, very firm, and they will gladly 1-star a book if it fails to live up to any of their specific criteria. And it seems like there's a big, and I blame TikTok for this in some ways, that there's a big push for characters to be infallible again. And it's because I think there are some readers who want a self-insert character, a blank slate, personality-free, effectively. So when they read characters who are making poor life choices and bad decisions, they feel this is a criticism of themselves, because they've ritualized what do I get from a book and what belongs in a book. And therefore, if a book fails to meet the ritual requirements, they don't get the outcome, and therefore that's a bad book. Which is it's a bit of a like, and I understand why people want content warnings on things, but it's part of the same deal. If you're going to feature some real heavy stuff about real world stuff, I get it, I understand. But warning people about everything they're going to encounter, you're meant to be challenged when you read. You shouldn't be, you shouldn't be horror slammed. There's one very popular fantasy book which does a real dirty on the reader, where maybe 80% of the way through the book, it switches tone from kind of quite young and simplistic into utter brutal horror. And you have kind of a promise you make your reader at the start of the book about what to expect. If I've read half this book, I shouldn't then get grotesque descriptions of sexual violence thrown at me. And I feel particularly passionate about this because I was listening to this book as an audiobook on a motorway, and so I couldn't turn it off when this change suddenly came in. And I was really, really quite angry about it because I wouldn't have listened to it. But we do have expectations. We don't need warnings unless we set up the premise and the tone. If you buy a horror book and you're surprised that it features frightening things, that isn't the fault of the author.
Yeah.
It's got a vampire on the front. What did you think it was going to be? Or it's got a shirtless Highlander on the front of it. Maybe it's going to have some sexy bits, y'all. But I do think we have rituals involved in our reading, and even the way we sit down to read. Like, I listen to a lot of audiobooks these days, and I just love how they send me to sleep, and then I have to keep finding where I was over and over, listen to the same chapter 18 times.
It's my curse as well with the audiobooks. Unless, I'll listen to them either when I'm driving or when I'm relaxing, and inevitably accidental naps. Every time. No matter how good the book is. Like, it's not the book's fault. I'm just sleepy. Do you have any, just to kind of bring it home here, do you have any other final pieces of advice that you'd like to offer authors specifically related to incorporating supernatural magic into their stories?
I would say you need to have your rules, but you don't need to know what they are until you finish writing it. If you don't want to get constrained in what you can and can't write by a set of rules you made up before you did the writing. Like, make them up as you go along, and then at the end codify them for yourself so that you've been consistent. And the reader doesn't have to know how everything works. It's not required, as long as the impacts of the supernatural remain consistent in the way that characters respond to them. So one of the things I always love talking about is power escalation, power levels. You know how in the Power Rangers, it goes, they have a fight with the putties and they beat up the putties really easily, and then the monster comes down. They can't take it in hand-to-hand combat, so sometimes they'll get out their weapons, and so now it can't beat them, so it has to grow big, and then they get the Zords, and then it pulls off its special move, so they have to make the Megazord, and then finally they play that same clip of the lightning sword. There's a steady escalation of power, which is why it works. And it's simplified for kids, but it's why it works in storytelling. What I struggle with sometimes in fantasy is when the power levels get so out of control so fast. I mentioned the Vampire Diaries before, and this is a good example. In the Vampire Diaries, there are vampires in season 1. In season 2, I think it's like the original vampires or something. You can't kill them except with a special silver dagger. And then in series 3, what do you got now? Oh, it's the mother of the vampires. Right? So, and then it's like, you've got, and by that point, they're just one more type of vampire, and it doesn't mean anything anymore. And being a vampire doesn't mean anything anymore because the super vampires are all there. So, it's a bit like. I think anime has this problem a lot as well. It's like, this isn't even my final form. It's like, why aren't you?
I'm looking at you.
Why aren't you using your best form first?
Just start in your final form.
Still love it though, don't we?
Why didn't you just go to fucking Super Saiyan immediately, man?
9,000.
Awesome. All right, well, Ed, that's it for this mini masterclass and our two-parter with Ed McDonald. Thank you so much for basking in the occult and fantasy and all that kind of fun stuff with us, buddy. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me. And please, Daughter of Redwinter is out, has been out for a year. Traitor of Redwinter is out October 23rd.
So
And
when this episode is out, when this episode is live,
yeah, she would love me to
Tentaclara
buy.
is Ed's.
Yeah, support Tentaclara.
Support Octopus. Buy my books.
Slightly menacing.
Yeah.
She is a bit menacing.
As well, for anyone who contributes to our Patreon at $10 or more a month, you can check out a reading by Ed from Traitor of Redwinter. So go check that out. Go get the books. Support Ed. Support Tentaclara. Ed, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at Ed McDonald TFK. We will call it Twitter till we die. You can find me on the picture on Instagram, Ed McDonald Author. I think I'm on TikTok on the same name. I think Ed McDonald Author. I think I'm on Facebook under Ed McDonald. Just scroll past the. I can't do the same joke again. That's the. I'm not doing the joke. There is a murderer called Ed McDonald who comes up ahead of me.
Not the famous person, not the murderer.
Yeah.
The next one.
The next one.
The other guy.
Yeah.
The guy that looks like this.
Yes. I'm alive and not in jail. That is how you identify me as the author, Ed McDonald.
You can also follow SFF Addicts on Instagram, Twitter, and Threads at sffaddictspod, or you can follow me at Adrian M. Gibson. MJ, what about you?
Yeah, you can find me across all the socials at MJ Kuhn Books, all one word, or mjkuhn.com. You can find all my links. So
Brilliant. Now, keep reading, keep imagining, and we'll see you next time on SFF Addicts.